Texas, 1944. The sun hung low in the sky, its heat thick and unforgiving, pressing down on the dirt roads that stretched endlessly across the barren plains. A small convoy of trucks rattled along the dusty path, the engines groaning under the weight of their precious cargo. Inside the trucks, there were no sounds of laughter, no chatter, just the soft shuffle of worn boots against the metal floors and the occasional cough. Among the passengers was Lieutenant Anna Muller, a young German woman who had once believed in the strength of her country's cause. A trained nurse, she had found herself not on the battlefield, but behind enemy lines, tending to the wounded in the field hospitals. But her world had shattered when she was captured in the chaos of war. Now, months later, she was no longer a nurse, a healer, but a prisoner of war, transported far from the front lines of Europe to a place she could never have imagined: Texas. Anna sat in the corner of the truck, her back pressed against the cold metal, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her eyes, weary from sleepless nights in prison camps, stared at the horizon. The land stretched out before her, a vast, desolate landscape that seemed to offer no comfort, no promise of safety. What lay ahead? She didn't know. She had been told nothing except that they were being taken to a ranch, a place where they would work, like common laborers. She had expected hardship, suffering, but nothing like this. The trucks finally came to a stop, and the soldiers disembarked, herding the prisoners out one by one. Anna stepped off the truck, her legs unsteady, but she forced herself to stand tall. Her uniform was ragged, dirty from the months of travel, but there was still a certain dignity in the way she held herself. The wind swept across the land, carrying the scent of dry grass and dust. For a moment, Anna thought she might be dreaming. Ahead of her stood a sprawling ranch, its wooden buildings dotted across the land. It looked nothing like the military camps she had seen in Europe. The air was warmer here, the sun more intense, and the world seemed to stretch out endlessly in every direction. She heard footsteps behind her, a soldier shouting orders as he guided the prisoners forward. Anna's thoughts raced. Was this some kind of trap? Would they be treated like cattle, like slaves? The uncertainty gnawed at her insides. But what she saw next left her frozen in place. A group of men on horseback rode up, their silhouettes framed by the orange glow of the setting sun. They wore wide-brimmed hats and weathered clothes, their faces obscured by shadows. These men were cowboys, real cowboys, not soldiers, not the men she had been taught to fear. They rode with an easy grace, their movements fluid and confident, as if they had been doing this for years, maybe even their whole lives. The leader, a tall man with a grizzled face and a calm demeanor, pulled his horse to a stop in front of the prisoners. His voice, deep and steady, broke the silence. "You're on my land now," he said, his eyes scanning the group of prisoners. "You'll work here, just like anyone else. But I promise you this, you won't be treated like animals." Anna couldn't speak. She didn't know how to respond. She had expected to see soldiers, armed guards, ready to force them into submission. But these men, these cowboys, seemed different. They had a calmness to them, a quiet strength that unsettled her even more than the soldiers had. They weren't hostile, but were they kind? The cowboy continued, his voice even as he spoke to the group. "You'll be working the fields. You'll clear brush, help with the cattle, and do what needs to be done. But you'll be fed. You'll be housed. No one's going to beat you here." Anna blinked, trying to make sense of what was happening. She glanced at the other prisoners. There were 10 women in total, including herself. All were soldiers, or had been. They all stood there confused, their eyes darting between the cowboys and each other. None of them seemed to know what to do, what to expect. The cowboy leader turned his horse toward the barn. "Come on, we'll show you where you'll sleep for the night." The prisoners were led through the sprawling ranch, the sound of the horses' hooves echoing on the dry ground as they walked past fields and pens, past long wooden structures that seemed to stretch into the horizon. Anna's mind raced. What was this place? As they passed a row of small, humble cabins, she noticed that the air here was different from the harsh, oppressive atmosphere of the prison camps. The land, though dry and cracked, had a certain peace about it, a stillness that made Anna uneasy. There was no shouting, no harsh commands, just the occasional sound of a cowboy's boots hitting the dirt or a distant cow lowing. They arrived at a small cabin, far enough from the main house but still close enough to the center of the ranch. Anna was given a cot inside with the other women. The cabin was simple, bare, but clean, something she hadn't expected. A thin blanket, a wooden bed frame, and a single lantern hanging from the ceiling. It wasn't much, but it was a far cry from the squalor she had endured in the prison camps. The women sat in silence, taking in their new surroundings. The hum of the ranch's life continued outside, but inside the cabin, it was quiet, still. Anna sat on the edge of her cot, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her thoughts were scattered, pulled in every direction. Why had they brought them here? Was this some form of punishment? Or had they been offered this as a chance to redeem themselves? A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. One of the cowboys entered, his face drawn but kind. He held a bowl of stew in his hands. "You're going to need your strength," he said, his voice low and respectful. "You'll work hard here, but we'll take care of you." Anna took the bowl, her fingers brushing against his. There was nothing threatening in his eyes, no malice in his words. But a part of her, the soldier part, the part that had been trained to survive no matter what, wanted to distrust him, wanted to resist. This place felt like a trap. And yet, the more she thought about it, the more she realized something. She had no other choice. The cowboy stepped back, leaving them to eat in silence. As Anna stirred the stew, the warmth of the food comforting in her stomach, she couldn't shake the feeling that this place, this ranch, was somehow different from everything she had known before. It was almost too good to be true. Her mind raced, but deep down, she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't alone anymore. For the first time in a long time, she felt a glimmer of hope. But would it last? The night fell quickly, and the women settled in for what they could only hope would be a night of peace. Outside, the ranch lay under a blanket of stars, quiet and still, with only the faintest sounds of cattle in the distance. And as Anna drifted into a restless sleep, she couldn't help but wonder, would she find safety here, or would the storm of war eventually find its way to them? The days bled into one another, each one like the last, hot, dry, and quiet. Yet beneath the surface of routine work and unfamiliar peace, an undercurrent of unease began to form. Anna had spent the last week on the ranch, adjusting to the rhythm of life under the sun. Each day she woke early and worked in the fields, clearing brush, repairing fences, and occasionally helping with the cattle. The cowboys worked alongside them, silent, steady, as though it was the most natural thing in the world to have a group of women prisoners laboring on their land. But Anna could feel the tension creeping in. It wasn't just the uncertainty of being in a strange land, so far from the horrors of war. It was the way she and the others were treated like part of the daily operations, not as prisoners, but as workers, almost as if they had earned their place. It was a kindness that both puzzled and disturbed her. There were moments when she would catch one of the cowboys, usually Bill, the one who had been assigned to work closest with her, looking at her with a strange curiosity. His face was always unreadable, his eyes shadowed beneath the brim of his hat. But Anna could see the way he tried not to look too closely at the women. His voice when he spoke was soft, almost kind, as though he were constantly measuring his words. Yet every time he passed her, she could feel an invisible wall between them. "Anna," Bill said one afternoon as they worked together near the cattle pens. The heat was suffocating, and the air was thick with dust. "You're doing well. It's not easy work, but you've got the spirit for it." Anna nodded, wiping the sweat from her brow. She had grown used to the physical labor, but it did little to ease the tension in her mind. "Thank you," she replied, her voice quiet but steady. There was something in the way he spoke to her, almost as if he respected her, as though the war hadn't turned her into something less than human. But in the back of her mind, Anna knew this could all be a facade. This place, with its calm and quiet, was too good to be true. Beside her, another woman, Maria, worked in silence. Maria was one of the older prisoners, a former nurse like Anna, but she was far more stoic, resigned. Her face was lined with age and the hardships of the war, but there was strength in her eyes. They had become friends over the past few days, and Anna couldn't help but wonder about her past. Do you think we're really safe here? Anna asked quietly, not wanting to disturb the others, but needing to voice the thought that had been gnawing at her since their arrival. Maria didn't look up from her work but spoke with a gravity that Anna had come to expect. No one's safe, Anna. Not really. But we have to do what we can with what we're given. The words stung more than Anna cared to admit. Safety was a lie. She had known that long before she had ever set foot on this ranch. But being here, being treated with what felt like decency, made her wonder if there was such a thing as peace after all. As the days passed, Anna couldn't shake the feeling that something was shifting. The other prisoners had begun to talk among themselves, their voices low and filled with unease. They had all been brought here with the promise of work, a roof over their heads, and food. But some were beginning to wonder if they were being kept here for another reason. One evening, after a long day of work, Anna sat with the others around a fire outside the cabin, their faces lit by the flickering flames. They had all grown close in the past week, despite the circumstances, and it was in moments like these, when they weren't laboring under the watchful eyes of the cowboys, that the fear and uncertainty seemed to slip away, if only for a moment. Do you think the war's really over for us? Another prisoner, Greta, asked, her voice a whisper in the night. She was younger than Anna, and though she had seen her fair share of horror, there was still something fragile about her. Anna hesitated before speaking, her eyes on the fire. It's never over, Greta. Not really. Not until the world decides to put it all behind them. The others fell into silence, the crackling fire the only sound that filled the space between them. Anna's thoughts wandered to the ranch's owners, the Cowboys, and their leader, Jed. He had been the one to greet them, the one who had given them the promise of safety. He had never raised his voice, never seemed to treat them like prisoners. He was the one who had set the tone, who had made them feel like they were part of something, if only for a short while. But as the days passed, Anna noticed something else. Jed was quiet, observant, always present, but never truly engaging. It was as though he was watching them just as much as they were watching him. He didn't say much to the women, and when he did, his words were clipped, measured. His gaze lingered just a moment too long, but his face never revealed what he was thinking. It was a moment of peace that Anna knew could shatter at any second. The next morning, as the sun rose over the ranch, Anna felt the familiar weight of uncertainty settle in her chest. They had been assigned to clear another field, working under the oppressive sun, their movements sluggish with the heat. Bill was there, leading the group, his demeanor unusually tense. "Work's been slow lately," he said abruptly, as if speaking to no one in particular. "Jed's been worried. Something's off." Anna's heart skipped a beat. She had never seen Bill so unsettled. "What do you mean?" she asked cautiously. Bill shot her a glance, his brow furrowed in a rare display of concern. "I don't know. Just something's coming, and when it does, we have to be ready." Before Anna could respond, a shout echoed from across the ranch. It was Jed, standing at the far end of the field, motioning for them to stop. The Cowboys immediately began to gather, moving with a sense of purpose Anna hadn't seen before. There was no time for questions now. Whatever was coming, it was coming fast. The uneasy feeling that had been building for days reached a crescendo. Anna's pulse quickened, and she exchanged worried glances with the other women. Something was changing. The fragile peace they had come to know was on the verge of breaking. The Cowboys had always been kind, but now even Bill's unspoken words seemed to echo with something more. Danger. Anna stood frozen, watching Jed as he approached. His face was set in grim lines, his hands tense by his sides. And for the first time, Anna saw the weight of responsibility in his eyes, the weight of the choices that had been made for him, for all of them. The moment of tension hung in the air, and Anna knew, deep down, that the calm of the past days would soon be shattered. She just didn't know how or when. The morning was uncharacteristically still, the sun barely peeking over the horizon, casting the ranch in an eerie calm. There was a sense of anticipation in the air, a feeling that something was about to break. Anna stood in the middle of the field, surrounded by the other women, their faces drawn with the same anxious uncertainty that twisted in her chest. The cows grazed lazily in the distance, unaware of the storm that was building on the horizon. But Anna couldn't ignore the tension that had settled in the air like a heavy weight. She had heard whispers in the past few days, rumors about soldiers, about something coming, but no one had been clear about what exactly it was. And then the signs began to appear. Jed's usual calm demeanor was slipping, his words less reassuring, his eyes more guarded. He seemed to be watching everyone, his cowboys, the prisoners, even the land itself, as if waiting for something. "Something's happening," Bill had said to her just the day before, his voice barely audible. "Jed's been getting messages. He's not telling anyone, but I think the war's coming here." The words had lingered in Anna's mind, unsettling her more than she cared to admit. The war coming here. She had thought in a fleeting moment of hope that perhaps they were far enough from the front lines to escape the chaos. But now the cracks were beginning to show, and the feeling of impending conflict was growing. The women had been working the fields, the same monotonous tasks they had become accustomed to. But today felt different. The air felt thicker, the silence heavier. The cowboys were unusually quiet, their movements sharp and precise, as if they were preparing for something. Jed arrived on horseback, his usual calm replaced with a tense energy that Anna had never seen before. He dismounted quickly, his boots kicking up the dry dust beneath him. His eyes scanned the group of prisoners, locking with Anna's for a brief moment, as if silently communicating something she couldn't quite grasp. "Gather up," Jed said, his voice firm. "We need to move quickly. The men are coming." Anna's heart skipped a beat. The men. Who were these men? Her mind raced. Could it be soldiers? Were they finally going to be taken back to the front lines? Or was something more sinister unfolding? "Who?" she asked, unable to contain her anxiety. Jed's gaze flickered to Bill, who nodded in silence. Jed turned back to the group, his expression hardening. "It's the soldiers. They've come for the prisoners. I need your help to get them out of here." Anna's stomach tightened. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. They weren't safe. This wasn't some peaceful retreat. They were trapped between two worlds, two sides of the war. Jed's voice lowered, a dangerous edge creeping into his words. "They'll take you back to the camps. I won't let that happen." A rush of conflicting emotions surged within Anna. On one hand, she wanted to trust Jed. He had been kind to them, had shown them more mercy than she had ever expected from anyone in this war. But on the other hand, she didn't know who he truly was. Was he a hero or just another player in the game of survival? Before she could ask any more questions, a shout broke the air, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps. Anna's heart raced as she looked toward the edge of the field. A group of soldiers, American soldiers, emerged from behind the ridge, their uniforms and rifles unmistakable. They weren't here to offer peace. They were here for the prisoners. Jed acted quickly, his movements swift and decisive. He motioned for the women to follow him into the barn, his voice low and urgent. "Get inside, hide. I'll buy you some time." Anna hesitated for only a moment, her mind torn. The soldiers were coming. This was real. The danger was here. The fear, the dread, all of it was crashing down on her. She glanced back at the other prisoners. Maria, Greta, and the others were already moving into the barn, but Anna's feet remained frozen to the ground. "Jed!" Anna called out, stepping toward him. "You don't have to do this. We don't need to run." Jed's face twisted with emotion, something raw, something that spoke of a deeper pain. "It's not about need," he said, his voice rough. "I promised you safety. I keep my promises." And with that, he was gone, running toward the soldiers, his back turned to the barn. Anna's mind raced. Was he really going to fight them off? Would he sacrifice himself for them? The first shot rang out, breaking the stillness, sending a shock of panic through Anna's body. She rushed into the barn, but her mind was still outside, with Jed, with the chaos that was unfolding. The door slammed behind her, but she couldn't shut out the sounds of the conflict. She could hear yelling, the crack of gunfire, the shouting commands. She had to do something, anything. Inside, the other women were huddled together, wide-eyed with fear. Maria's face was grim, her lips pressed into a thin line, while Greta trembled beside her. Anna knew that they were all thinking the same thing. Jed was out there, facing the soldiers alone, and they had no way of knowing if he would survive. She turned to Bill, who had followed them into the barn, his face pale but determined. "We have to help him," she said, her voice shaking with urgency. Bill's eyes met hers, and for a long moment, there was silence between them. Then with a single nod, he moved to the back of the barn, grabbing a few tools from the shelves. "I'll cover the back," he said, his voice calm despite the panic in his eyes. "You go with the others to the front. We'll make it work." Anna's heart pounded. This was it. This was the moment when everything changed. But before she could take a step, a sudden crash echoed from the front of the barn. The door flew open, and a soldier, one of the Americans, stood there, rifle raised. Anna's heart stopped. There was no time to think, no time to hesitate. She had to act. She had to choose. For a split second, everything slowed. Anna's mind raced. She could surrender. She could plead for her life. Or she could fight. Fight for her life. Fight for Jed. For the others. But there was a price to pay for every decision. The weight of that choice crushed her chest. In the end, it wasn't just about survival. It was about loyalty. Loyalty to Jed, to the kindness he had shown them, to the promises that had been made. "I won't go back," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. "Not without him." Without another word, Anna dashed toward the door, the sound of Bill's voice urging her forward. She had no weapon, no way to fight, but she wouldn't stand by and wait for the storm to take them all. The door slammed open again, this time by her own hand, and she rushed out into the field, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The world around her was a blur. Shots rang out. The chaos engulfed her. But there in the distance, she saw Jed. He was on the ground, his face bloodied but alive. The soldiers were closing in, their guns raised, and without thinking, Anna ran toward him. She knew that she had made her choice, but it might cost them everything. The world around Anna seemed to move in slow motion as she sprinted across the field, her heart pounding in her chest. The sounds of gunfire, shouts, and the distant cries of her fellow prisoners were drowned out by the rushing of blood in her ears. Jed was on the ground, his face smeared with blood, surrounded by soldiers who were closing in on him. The promise of safety, of peace, that had seemed so tangible just days ago now, seemed like a cruel joke. Anna's breath was ragged, her legs burning with every step, but she couldn't stop. She couldn't leave him behind. Jed had saved them, protected them. Now it was her turn. The soldiers saw her coming. One of them turned, his rifle raised, and she saw the flash of his hand as he aimed. But she didn't stop. She couldn't. Her mind flashed back to the days on the ranch, to the way Jed had treated them with dignity, the way he had looked after them. She couldn't let him die alone. A shot rang out. Anna's body jerked to the side, the world spinning around her. She felt the sting of something warm and wet across her shoulder, and for a moment, her vision blurred. But it didn't matter. She wasn't going to stop. Not now. Another shot. The sound was deafening. Jed's voice, hoarse, weak, cut through the haze. "Anna, get back! It's too late!" But she wasn't listening. Not anymore. She had made her choice. She could hear his voice, but she couldn't turn away. Not when he needed her. She reached him. The soldiers had backed off, unsure of what to do as they saw her charging toward Jed. The air around them felt thick with tension, the weight of their choices hanging like a shadow over the field. Jed was on the ground, his rifle dropped to his side, his body covered in dust and blood. His breath came in short, jagged bursts, but his eyes, though clouded with pain, still held a flicker of that same quiet strength. "Anna!" he gasped, reaching out a hand, but his movements were slow, weak. "Go. Now." But she didn't move. She crouched down beside him, her hands trembling as she touched his face. He was warm, feverish. She could feel the weight of his blood on her fingers. His chest rose and fell with shallow breaths, but he was alive. "No," she whispered fiercely, shaking her head. "Not without you." Jed tried to smile, a pained expression crossing his face. "I've already done what I can. Now you have to survive. They won't stop coming, Anna. If you stay here—" "Stop!" she interrupted him, her voice cracking with emotion. She cupped his face, forcing him to meet her gaze. "You've kept us alive this long. I won't leave you here. I won't let you die for us." For a moment, there was silence, the weight of their decision heavy in the air. The soldiers were still there, but they hadn't advanced yet. Anna could see the conflict in their eyes. hesitation on their faces. They were soldiers, trained to fight, but they were also human. She had seen it in the way they looked at her, at Jed, as though they didn't want to carry out the orders. But orders were orders, and Anna knew that if she didn't act now, they would be taken back. And Jed, he might not survive. "Help me," Anna said, turning to the soldiers, her voice pleading. "Help me save him. We don't want to fight." One of the soldiers, a younger man with dark eyes, looked at her for a long moment, then down at Jed. There was a flicker of something in his gaze, uncertainty, maybe even guilt. But in the end, he lowered his rifle, taking a step back. He wasn't going to fire. Not yet. The other soldiers were still tense, their hands twitching toward their weapons, but they didn't make a move. Anna could feel the shift in the air. The hesitation was palpable. "Please," she whispered again, her voice hoarse. "We don't have much time. He needs help. We need to get him to safety." The young soldier who had lowered his rifle nodded, turning to his comrades. "We can't just leave them out here to die," he said quietly, his voice filled with reluctant compassion. He didn't wait for a response, just moved toward Anna and Jed. "Get him up. We'll get you out of here." Anna's heart skipped. She couldn't believe it. There was hope. There was a chance. She helped Jed to his feet, her arms shaking under his weight. The soldiers stepped forward, two of them offering their help, lifting Jed between them, while the others kept watch. They moved quickly, their pace urgent as they made their way toward the woods that bordered the ranch. Anna's mind was racing, her thoughts fragmented. She couldn't let herself stop. She couldn't think about what might happen next. The only thing that mattered was getting Jed to safety. And yet, as they moved, the weight of their escape settled heavily on her heart. The soldiers, their captors, were now her only hope. As they neared the tree line, the sky darkened, the sun now fully set. The air was cooler, the night stretching out before them like an endless void. Anna glanced back toward the ranch where the chaos had begun, the sound of voices and horses still faintly echoing in the distance. She didn't know how long they had before the soldiers would regroup, but she couldn't stop. Jed's grip on her hand tightened as they moved deeper into the forest. His breathing labored, but he was still alive. And as long as he was alive, there was hope. But then, just as they neared the edge of the trees, a shout rang out. "Stop!" came the command, harsh and loud. Anna froze. The soldier behind her was already raising his rifle, his eyes wide with panic. But it wasn't one of the soldiers. It was Jed. His voice, weak but strong enough to carry over the distance, broke through the tension in the air. "Leave them," Jed said, his voice hoarse but steady. "We can't run forever. Let them go." Anna's heart clenched, and she turned to him in shock. "What are you saying? You're not—" "It's not just about us anymore, Anna." Jed's voice was resolute, filled with a quiet determination. "It's about them. They've given us a chance. We can't take that away from them." Anna's eyes filled with tears as she realized what he meant. Jed was making the ultimate sacrifice, not just for them, but for the chance of a better life, for survival, for peace. "Jed, no," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Please." But he was already nodding, his decision made. "You go. Live. Tell them we fought, that we tried." The world around her seemed to collapse in that moment. She wanted to scream, to beg him to change his mind, but the words caught in her throat. She had to make the choice now. "Go," Jed said again, softer this time, his eyes locking with hers. "I'll hold them off. You don't have much time." Tears streamed down Anna's face as she kissed his cheek, a final gesture of love and gratitude. The soldiers, still hesitant, watched her, their expressions unreadable. Anna turned, pulling away from Jed, her legs barely moving as she stumbled toward the trees. She knew the choice had been made. They couldn't stay, couldn't turn back. And as the forest closed around her, her heart broke with the knowledge that Jed would never make it out alive. The night felt endless as Anna moved deeper into the forest, her body numb from exhaustion and shock. Every step away from Jed, away from the ranch, felt like it ripped her apart more than the last. She could still hear the faint sounds of shouting, the crack of gunfire in the distance. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat heavy with the weight of her decision. She had left him. She had left him. The tears came in waves, uncontrollable, choking sobs that echoed through the quiet night. She stumbled over the uneven ground, her hands trembling as she wiped her eyes. Every instinct in her body screamed at her to go back, to turn around and fight, to do anything to bring Jed back. But the reality was settling in, like a weight on her chest. He was gone, and she was alive because of him. She couldn't have asked for a more selfless act. Jed had chosen to sacrifice everything for them, for her, for a chance for them to escape. And she had taken it. She had chosen to live, to carry on in the hope that the war, the brutality they had all witnessed, would eventually fade into the past. But could she truly live with that? The soldiers had helped them. No, they hadn't killed them. They had spared them. They had hesitated when they could have easily taken them back to the camps. And now Anna was free as one could be in a world ravaged by war. But at what cost? "Keep moving," Bill said, his voice soft but firm, snapping Anna out of her thoughts. The group was moving cautiously through the woods, staying low, trying to avoid detection. Bill, the cowboy who had been their protector, had stayed behind with her, making sure they didn't leave anyone behind. His gaze met hers, and for the first time, she saw something raw in his eyes. Pain, grief, understanding. But there was no judgment. He knew the cost of survival. He had seen it before. Anna was no longer the prisoner. Now they were both survivors, bound by the choices they had made. They found shelter in a small abandoned cabin further down the trail, hidden from the main road. The air was thick with the scent of wood and decay. Anna felt the weight of the silence pressing down on her. The women were already inside, sitting on the rough wooden floor, their eyes red from crying, their faces pale and exhausted. Maria was the first to speak. "He saved us," she whispered, the words hanging in the air, too heavy to dismiss. "He gave his life for us. What are we supposed to do now?" Anna didn't know how to answer. She looked at the others, their faces drawn and haggard from the hardships they had endured. They were alive, but at what cost? "I don't know," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "But we have to keep going. For him, we can't let his sacrifice be in vain." The other women nodded, but there was a heaviness in the air. The kind of heaviness that only comes with the weight of a lost future. The kind of silence that follows when a life has been taken. When a promise has been broken and no one is left to make it whole again. Anna leaned against the wall of the cabin, staring into the dark, trying to make sense of it all. What was her future now? What was there to look forward to? Her life had been defined by the war, by the choices she had made, and now, in this quiet cabin, away from the battlefields, the world seemed to spin in a way she couldn't grasp. And then, a voice from the past returned to her. Jed's voice. "You have to survive, Anna. That's all that matters. What happens after that is up to you." He had said that in the field, when she had wanted to stay, when she had begged him to come with her. He had known. He had known the choice she would have to make, and he had given her the courage to live. But living was harder than she had ever imagined. The next few days were a blur. They traveled in small groups, hiding in the woods, making their way toward the nearest town. The soldiers, though they had spared them, were still out there, looking for them. They couldn't stay in one place for too long. They had to keep moving. And yet, in their hearts, they all knew that there was no escaping the shadow of what had happened. Anna's mind was constantly at war with itself. She had survived, they had survived, but at the cost of everything. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Jed's face, saw his determination, his sacrifice. Every time she took a breath, every step she made forward, she felt the weight of what he had done for her, for them. And every time she felt a little more hollow. The days passed slowly. There were no more attacks, no more danger, but the world outside had changed. They had to live with the truth. The war had not ended for them. The war was still alive, lingering in the choices they had made, in the sacrifices that had been given. One morning, after weeks of hiding, the group made it to a small village. It was a place that had been untouched by the chaos of the war, a place where the memories of the battlefield seemed distant and forgotten. The women found work, found refuge among the people who had been untouched by the horrors they had witnessed. Anna worked as a nurse again, helping to rebuild lives. to care for the injured, the sick. It was a new beginning, but it was also a reminder that nothing could ever be the same. The war had taken so much, and yet it had also given them something. They had been given a chance to rebuild, to live. But living came with its own burden. And as Anna sat by the window one evening, looking out over the quiet village, she realized something. Survival wasn't just about living through the war. It was about living with it afterward. The peace she had sought in the quiet of the ranch, in the sacrifice of one man's death, was a peace that would never fully come. But she would honor it, honor Jed, every day. She would live, and in doing so, she would carry his memory forward into every action, every decision. And perhaps one day she would understand that the true cost of peace was not the absence of war, but the presence of those who had fought for it.